Why do millions of people believe that a tiny, almost imperceptible change in musical tuning can actually heal the body, calm the mind, and somehow reconnect us to the very fabric of the universe? I mean, if you've spent any time online lately, you've definitely seen the massive viral phenomenon surrounding 432 hertz. Social media is just absolutely flooded with debates and huge claims about this supposed healing frequency. But what if everything you've heard about this movement is just wrong? Today, in this explainer, we're going to go completely down the rabbit hole to separate the myth from the actual music. So you have to ask, is 432 hertz really the frequency of the universe? Millions of people, along with countless meditation channels and spiritual communities, absolutely insist that it is. But to really uncover the truth, we need to step back from all that massive internet hype. We have to genuinely investigate the actual acoustics, the forgotten history, and the deep psychology behind what we're actually hearing. The battle lines of this debate are pretty stark. On one side, you have 432 hertz, which is championed as cosmic, filled with ancient wisdom and inherently healing. Believers say it perfectly aligns with planetary orbits and sacred geometry. On the exact opposite side, you have 440 hertz. This is the standard tuning for almost all modern music, your favorite Spotify tracks, and global orchestras. But it gets heavily criticized by the movement as cold, bureaucratic, and totally sterile. People argue we literally lost something vital when we made the switch to 440. But how did we actually end up with 440 hertz in the first place? To answer that, let's look at the birth of 440 hertz. Before standardization, playing music was honestly a logistical nightmare. Every city, and sometimes even every single orchestra, just chose its own pitch. A violin built in Vienna might sound completely out of tune with a piano in Paris. France actually set their pitch to 435 hertz back in 1859. Italy briefly experimented with 440 hertz in 1885. Some famous composers like Verdi even pushed for lower tunings simply so their opera singers wouldn't completely strain their voices. So, the push for a global standard, it wasn't mystical at all. It was purely industrial. By 1939, an international conference in London recommended 440 hertz, and by 1955, the ISO officially standardized it. It was a massive, practical win for instrument manufacturers and global orchestras. However, this incredibly pragmatic shift birthed a massive internet rumor. You will very often hear claims that Joseph Goebbels and the Nazi regime forcefully imposed 440 hertz to somehow disharmonize human consciousness and control the masses. Let's be incredibly clear about this. Historians and sound engineers confirm this conspiracy lacks absolutely any historical evidence. The regime had zero role in this global standardization. In fact, historian and mathematician Jakub Marian sums it up perfectly. He calls it perhaps the most ridiculous conspiracy theory of all time. The 1939 decision was simply a practical choice made by a committee of engineers and musicians who were just looking for consistency. There was no secret, sinister plot. Moving right along to our next section, investigating the science. So if the history is completely mundane, what about all those cosmic claims? Well, when we apply real scientific scrutiny, the mystical mathematics quickly fall apart. First off, the unit hertz is entirely man-made. It measures cycles per second, but our definition of a second is a completely arbitrary human invention. If humanity measured time on a different clock, 432 hertz wouldn't even be the number 432. Second, there was no universal ancient tuning. Medieval monks definitely didn't use hertz to measure their chants. And finally, what about those viral videos showing perfect, beautiful sand patterns at 432 hertz and chaotic blobs at 440? Scientists point out that literally any pure tone rate patterns on a Chladni plate, even the slightest microscopic shift in the physical setup changes the entire result. But we really shouldn't dismiss the movement entirely without looking at actual human biology. Let's focus for a second on the number 33. This represents the exact number of volunteers in a really fascinating 2019 pilot study by researchers Callimassi and Pomponi. This was actually one of the very first double-blind tests comparing the two frequencies, where participants listened to the exact same movie soundtrack tuned to both pitches. Let's break down what they actually found, because there were some genuinely intriguing biological reactions. When listening to 432 hertz, the average heart rate of the group dropped by about 5 beats per minute. There was also a noticeable trend toward lower blood pressure and slower breathing, with participants reporting feeling much more focused. But There is a very crucial limitation here. With only 33 people, this pilot study just lacks strong statistical power. It definitely suggests a mild calming effect, but it absolutely requires much, much larger trials before anyone can declare 432 Hz a biological miracle. We also have to be really careful with unverified claims out there. For instance, a 2022 EEG study by Brenislav Tanasic suggested that 432 Hz actually increased left brain activity, which is typically linked to positive emotions. However, this study was published by a little-known source and, importantly, lacks mainstream peer review. To date, no large independent scientific labs have confirmed any dramatic neural changes just from listening to 432 Hz. This brings us to our next major topic, the psychology of sound. So, if the physics don't really explain it, and the biology is still largely inconclusive, why do listeners genuinely experience profound emotions when they hear 432 Hz? The crucial piece of the puzzle here is expectation bias. Human perception is incredibly subjective. Think about it. If you click on a video explicitly labeled cosmic healing frequency, your brain is already primed to find it relaxing. If you firmly believe a certain tone will heal you, your brain can often manifest that exact calming effect through sheer suggestion. It's an incredibly powerful placebo. Then there's something called the novelty effect. As Jakub Marian points out again, if 432 Hz were some kind of sweet spot, someone would have noticed by now. Just think about your own life. Our ears have been hardwired to 440 Hz for as long as we've been alive. When you suddenly hear a familiar song pitched just a tiny bit flatter, it immediately catches your attention. It breaks your lifelong habituation. It feels warmer, or maybe more mellow, quite simply because it is different than what you hear every single day. Yet even despite the lack of hard scientific proof, this movement just continues to grow, especially among independent artists. For musicians like ambient producer Aurora Dawn, 432 Hz has become something bigger. It's a rebellion against the hyper-processed, loudness-obsessed pop of our digital age. By tuning down, artists are making a very intentional cultural statement. They are tapping into a deep human longing to reconnect with nature, authenticity, and raw emotion. Even if the cosmic geometry behind it is just a beautiful metaphor, the feeling is very real. Which brings us to the final chapter of our explainer, finding true harmony. Let's look at the pure acoustical reality for a second. Musicologists will be the very first to tell you that pitch alone does not determine musicality. If you take a brilliant Mozart aria and transpose it from 440 down to 432, the harmonic intervals, those mathematical relationships between the notes that actually make the melody beautiful, they remain completely identical. A sloppy musician playing at 432 Hz is still going to sound terrible, and a master playing at 440 will still make you cry. Ultimately, this entire debate is just a matter of personal artistic preference. There really is no strict right or wrong here. And that leaves us with this final thought. Maybe the real story here was never actually about finding a magical, universe-unlocking frequency. Whether you prefer the standard brilliance of 440 Hz or the mellow warmth of 432 Hz, the search for harmony may tell us more about ourselves than any frequency ever could.